Hello, this is the last section on life science, and we're going to talk about the ecosystem. The ecosystem basically is what's living and non-living in the world in a specific area. A lot of times it could be like an ecosystem could be your backyard, if you will, or it could be like the state of Kentucky, or it could be like the United States. So the ecosystems can be, broken down in many different ways. Um, but when usually we talk about ecosystem, we're usually talking about a little bit of a smaller level of things. But um, this topic here is really going to talk about how energy moves throughout the ecosystem. So the first thing they want to talk about is what they call primary producers. Sometimes they use the word autotrophs. Autotrophs are living things that can create their own energy. Now, do y'all know what can create their own energy? This is kind of a clue over here. Yeah, that's kind of like the plant off of Wally. Yeah, so without plants, the primary producers, there would not be any life. And they're really the primary food source as well. They have the most energy available. So if you're eating a primary producer, if you're eating a plant, you're getting energy directly without loss of energy. So you get the biggest bang for your buck if you're eating things that are green. So fruits and vegetables, they're the kind of the primary sources. Again, when I'm following my diet, a lot of what we call superfoods, in the category of superfoods, a lot of them are green. Needless to say, this starts to make a lot of sense to me when I start studying this life science and trying to share this information to you. So these autotrophs really have the most energy. So a lot of times they're called superfoods. Now for us, so we have these different levels of consumers. Yes, a human being is a consumer. We don't make our own energy. A lot of times we're categorized as a heterotroph. Uh, we don't make our own energy. Only autotrophs can make their own energy. The heterotrophs, what they have is they get energy from different food sources. So heterotrophs are also referred to as consumers. So we have these different types of consumers. We have what's referred to as a primary consumer, a secondary consumer, and a tertiary consumer. So this is kind of how energy is going to get moved from one system to the next. And one of the things they're trying to do is show you with some numbers. In the primary producers, there's this 10,000 number. But if you look at the next level, there's this 1,000 number. So there's a lot of loss of energy from one level to the next. Only 10% of the energy is passed on to the next level. In other words, 90% of the energy is lost. And a lot of that is lost in the form of heat back into the environment. So that's that cellular respiration. So when it comes to energy loss, if you're a secondary consumer, you're only getting 10% of your energy from the level below you. So again, primary consumers are only supplying 10% energy to this next level. And then if you look here, there's now just a 10. So if we do that 10% again, tertiary consumers are only getting 10% of the energy. So there is a lot of loss of energy from one level to the next. So if you're a tertiary, you know, there's not a whole lot of energy coming from you if you're uh, passing energy on to the next level. Again, if you're at the top of the food chain, basically you're a lot of times you're going to die, not from a predator, but you're going to die from just natural causes, things like that. Now, everything that dies goes back to the earth, back to our planet Earth, the soil, and that's where things get decomposed. And that's where we have these important things called like fungi and things like that. They kind of break down the dead material into nutrients that can, again, restart this circle of life for the primary producers the primary consumers, the secondary consumers, and the tertiary consumers. So that's what this is kind of trying to describe here. Again, notice that the primary consumers are, again, the autotrophs. They're the only ones who can make their own energy. The rest of us rely on the autotrophs for energy. Now, over here is just a kind of a small ecosystem. They're talking about the Chesapeake Bay waterbird food web. So we talk about the water birds. There's a lot of water birds here. There's the osprey, the bald eagle. They're at the top. They're the tertiary consumers. The secondary consumers, there are some gulls and wading birds. There's a large fish. There's a sea duck, a swan. Those are pretty high up the food chain. They're pretty big animals as well. Primary is, you notice that they're starting to get a little bit smaller here. Your primary consumers are your uh, smaller fish, clams and oysters, it look like. You have some ducks and some mute swans, and also they're a little bit smaller, so that they could still be prey for some of these other things. But these are also referred to as herbivores. Herbivores mean they're only going to eat plants, but some of these other consumers actually would eat plants or animals. So I can't remember that word off the top of my head here. I think it's like an omnivore or something like that. You have a herbivore, a carnivore. I think an omnivore eats plants and animals, and a carnivore only eats just meat. So herbivores we have down through here, and then at the very bottom of the food source, again, is really where all the energy really is phytoplankton and water vegetation, things that are growing around the lakes or ponds. So these are, the autotrophs, if you will, are down here. And if you follow the arrows, you can kind of see what consumes what, if you will. So notice if you see this vegetation, you kind of see that this geese and mute swans, they are mainly just a vegetarian, but also this tundra swan eats vegetation. But notice that this tundra swan also eats, like this arrow here goes to the tundra swan. So this tundra swan also eats these clams or oysters and things like that. I use the word bivalves there, but kind of looks like a clam or an oyster to me. But these arrows kind of dictate who consumes what in the food web. And it's really important to notice that if these primary consumers were not here, if the vegetation was lost, this whole food web would be turned upside down, and basically this ecosystem would die off. The creatures would have to move off into another ecosystem if the primary producers died off in that area. So it's very vital that we protect our plants, as they are the driving force behind all of all of life here on Earth. So I'm going to stop there, but that kind of talks a little about how energy is transferred through the different living creatures in an ecosystem. And this actually shows you kind of over on the right side how an ecosystem actually works. So feel free to pause the video and study more on this graphic. And there's probably another video you can watch that kind of talks more about this as well. So that concludes our lessons on life science.